I'm involved in the part of the project which looks at transfers and transatlantic transfers, and I actually have done a little bit of research into this particular aspect of conspiracy theories, looking at the transfer of the fears of the Illuminati and how that then was absorbed into American culture in the late 18th, early 19th century. My new interest has to do with the fact that I've become aware that there is an interesting pre-chapter to this story where the transfer actually occurs in the opposite direction, fears of conspiracy coming from America and finding their way into European thinking in the 18th century. And that is going to be the focus of some of my research here. It began simply by considering the fact that conspiracy had a fairly narrow definition traditionally, and it was linked to the fact that conspiracy was seen as something which was undertaken by a small group of people. And indeed, if you read Machiavelli, then he recommends to the conspirators keep the group as small as possible to prevent the cover being blown. The consideration is simply, I mean, if you consider how we have these fears of conspiracy in modern culture, a lot of the time they don't just apply to a small group of people. And the notion of the conspiracy is generalized. And I was looking at when does that happen? How does it happen? The answer in some ways is rather simple. About the middle of the 18th century, you find talk of general conspiracies. And a lot of the time that has to do with uprisings, potential uprisings, or indeed uprisings which actually occurred on the part of the slaves in America or on the part of the Native Americans. And what is interesting is that the conditions were there for far more general conspiracies, because there was often a language barrier, meaning that the white colonialists, the European colonialists in America, were not able to understand what the Native Americans were talking about or the slaves, and that generated the fear that when they spoke among themselves, there was they were instigating a general conspiracy against their white European colonial overlords. And this notion of a general conspiracy then finds its way back into European discourse in the middle of the 18th century, and that will be the focus of the next part of my research, because we have here an interesting example of a transfer occurring actually in the direction which we don't really expect, the thought not coming from Europe and then being transferred to America, but instead it's happening actually here in the opposite direction. That's just one little focus of my research, tied into this larger concern of the transfer of fears of conspiracy back and forth across the Atlantic.